The letter that changed everything. The night was unusually quiet in Sundar Pichai's Delhi home. Outside, a faint drizzle kissed the earth, filling the air with the scent of wet soil and monsoon nostalgia. Sundar sat in the corner of his mother's old study, surrounded by dusty books and memories. His eyes lingered on a worn wooden box resting on the table, one he had never opened before. It had been sealed with a faded red thread, tied in the delicate way his mother used to secure her things. She had passed away years ago, yet tonight her presence felt stronger than ever. The world knew Sundar as the CEO of Google, the calm visionary who spoke softly but changed the course of technology. But few knew about the woman behind him, the one who had shaped his values, his humility, and his quiet strength. His mother, Lakshmi Pichai, had always lived a life of simplicity. While others saw her as an ordinary woman from Madurai, Sundar knew she carried extraordinary wisdom, the kind that didn't shout, but whispered through actions. As he untied the red thread, his heart pounded like a young boy about to uncover a hidden truth. Inside the box were small relics of his childhood, a brass bangle, an old photograph, and a neatly folded letter sealed in an envelope that read, "To my son, when you are ready to understand." Sundar's fingers trembled as he slid the paper out. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, soft, neat, and patient. He began to read. "My dear Sundar," it began. "If you are reading this, it means time has done what it always does. Move forward. There is something I never told you. Not because I wished to hide it, but because you needed to find your own strength first. You once asked me why I never took credit for what I built. Now you deserve the truth." His breath caught. "Built what?" Sundar frowned, his mind racing. His mother had worked as a stenographer when he was young. Humble, devoted, always there for the family. She never spoke of achievements. He continued reading. "Before you were born, I worked with a small team of engineers in a government research lab in Chennai. We were experimenting with new communication models that could connect distant offices through coded signals, a primitive form of what later became the foundation for digital communication networks. I was the only woman in that team. But when the project succeeded, my name was removed from the final report." Sundar froze. His heart tightened. His mother had been part of something revolutionary, and yet no one knew. He looked around the room as if the walls themselves could explain the injustice that history had buried. "They said a woman's name would confuse the investors," the letter continued. "So I stayed silent. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the work lived on. But when I saw you grow, when I saw your curiosity, your kindness, I knew you would one day bring light to places where silence had stolen truth." His eyes blurred with tears. Sundar placed the letter gently on the table, his mind echoing with memories of her late nights typing by lamplight. Her patient advice, "Always let your work speak, not your pride." Now it all made sense. He leaned back and whispered, "Amma, you were the pioneer, not just me." A wave of emotions washed over him. Admiration, sorrow, gratitude. The CEO who had faced global audiences, policy debates, and the world's toughest questions now felt like a boy again, humbled by his mother's quiet strength. But something inside him shifted that night. The truth wasn't just emotional, it was calling him to act. He knew he had to tell the world, not to glorify her, but to honor the millions like her, women whose names were lost in the margins of history. 2 weeks later, Sundar was invited to speak at a National Innovation Summit in New Delhi. It was to be attended by Prime Minister Modi himself, along with hundreds of scientists, engineers, and students from across India. Sundar rarely got nervous, but this time he could feel his heart race. He had planned a speech that would reveal his mother's story publicly for the first time. That morning, as he prepared his notes, he placed her letter inside his jacket pocket, close to his heart. He didn't know how people would react, whether they would see it as a personal confession or a forgotten piece of history. But he knew it had to be said. The auditorium was filled with energy. Bright screens flashed his name and cameras waited to stream every second. When Sundar walked onto the stage, dressed in his simple blue shirt and glasses, the applause was warm but restrained. He smiled faintly, his calm presence silencing the crowd. "Thank you," he began softly, his voice steady yet emotional. "Today I don't want to speak as the CEO of Google. I want to speak as a son." The audience fell completely silent. He spoke about his mother, her quiet dignity, her sacrifices, her intellect. Then slowly he revealed the secret. The audience listened in stunned silence as Sundar explained how Lakshmi Pichai's work had laid the foundation for communication models that shaped the digital world. He paused for a moment, his voice breaking slightly. She never asked for recognition. She taught me that true greatness is not about being seen, but about helping others rise. But today, I think it's time her story is heard. By the time he finished reading her letter aloud, there wasn't a single dry eye in the room. Journalists typed feverishly. Cameras zoomed in, and for a moment, India's collective heart seemed to stop and listen to a mother's long-lost legacy. Then something unexpected happened. Prime Minister Modi, sitting in the front row, slowly stood up. He placed his hands together in a namaste, bowing his head slightly in respect. The audience followed, standing one by one until the entire hall rose in silence. Sundar looked up, overwhelmed. His voice trembled as he said, "Thank you, sir." "She would have been proud to see this moment," Modi replied softly. "No, Sundar. India is proud to have had a mother like her." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was profound. It carried the weight of 1,000 unsung heroes of every mother who had built dreams in silence. But the story didn't end there. Later that night, when Sundar returned to his hotel, he received an old phone call from a man who claimed to have worked in the same research lab as his mother. His voice was trembling. "Mr. Pichai," he said, "your mother didn't just work on the project. She saved it. Without her, it would have failed." Sundar froze. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. The man sighed. "There was a crisis back then. Funding issues, data loss, pressure from higher-ups. They were about to shut it down, but your mother rewrote the entire code from memory. I was there that night, and when it worked, they took her name off the report." Sundar sat in silence, the phone pressed against his ear. He had thought he'd discovered everything that night. But this was just the beginning. The rain began to fall again outside his window, just as it had the night he opened the box. He looked out into the city lights, whispering to himself, "Amma, what else did you hide from the world?" The answer, he knew, would change everything. The forgotten archives. The following morning, Sundar woke before dawn. The sky outside his hotel window still wore a shade of deep indigo, that silent moment before sunrise when everything feels suspended between night and day. His mind refused to rest. The old man's voice from the previous night still echoed in his head. She saved the project. She rewrote the entire code from memory. Those words had carved themselves deep into his thoughts. He realized that what he had uncovered about his mother was only the surface of something far more profound, perhaps even buried intentionally. He sat quietly holding a cup of chai, letting the steam curl upward as he thought about her. About all those nights she stayed awake, working by the dim yellow light while he slept peacefully as a child. He remembered her humming old Tamil songs under her breath while typing, her calm voice saying, "The world may forget who you are, Sundar, but never forget who you choose to be." Now he began to wonder if those words had come from pain she had never shared. By mid-morning, Sundar called the old man back. His name was Venkataraman, now in his 70s, his voice fragile yet determined. They agreed to meet at a small cafe in Chennai that afternoon. Sundar canceled all his appointments for the day without hesitation. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking like a CEO. He was thinking like a son searching for his mother's truth. The cafe was quiet, tucked between narrow lanes, smelling faintly of roasted coffee and rain-damp stone. Venkataraman was already there, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his tea. When Sundar entered, the old man's eyes widened, not out of surprise that he had come, but out of respect. "Your mother would have wanted this," he whispered as Sundar sat down. "Please," Sundar said softly, "tell me everything you remember." Venkataraman took a deep breath. "We were part of a small team," he began. "The government had tasked us with building a communication system that could send coded data between two computers without physical cables. It was the late 70s, early 80s. We didn't have the luxury of modern tools. Everything was written manually, calculated by hand. And your mother, she was brilliant. She understood logic in ways even we couldn't explain. She wasn't just typing for us, Sundar. She was solving equations we couldn't." He paused, his eyes drifting away as if replaying those long-forgotten nights. Then came the crisis. Our lead engineer left abruptly. The funding was about to be cut. We lost half our data due to a system failure. Most of us thought it was over. But your mother stayed behind that night. She worked alone for nearly 20 hours. She recreated the code from memory, line by line. I came in the next morning and found her asleep on the floor, the terminal still glowing. Sundar leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. Did she ever talk about it afterward? No, Venkataraman said, shaking his head. When the project succeeded, the credit went to the senior officers. She was told that her contribution would not be recorded, that her name might complicate funding approvals. She never argued. She smiled and said, "If the work helps someone someday, that's enough for me." We all wanted to protest, but she asked us not to. Silence filled the cafe. The rain began to tap lightly against the window pane, like time itself mourning the forgotten. Sundar felt a deep ache settle in his chest. He had faced many injustices in the corporate world, but this was different. This was personal. Is there any record left? Sundar finally asked. Any document, any file? Venkataraman nodded slowly. There might be. When the lab was shut down, some archives were transferred to the old research center in Theramani. I heard they still store backup data there, though no one's touched it in decades. Sundar's eyes sharpened. Then that's where I'll go. By afternoon, he was standing before the aging concrete building of the Theramani Research Center. Vines crept along its cracked walls and the rusted gate creaked open with a reluctant sigh. A faint smell of old paper and dust filled the air as he stepped inside. Time seemed to have stopped there. Broken typewriters, faded charts, and forgotten machines lay scattered like relics of a different world. He spoke to the caretaker, an elderly man who had worked there for years. When Sundar explained who he was and what he was looking for, the man's expression changed from confusion to recognition. "Lakshmi, madam," he murmured. "Yes, I remember her. Quiet, always polite. We used to call her the human calculator. She once helped my son with his math homework. Is there any way to access her old files?" Sundar asked. The caretaker scratched his head. "There's a storage room at the back, room number 9. It's mostly sealed. You might find something there, but no one's been in for years. The humidity, it might have destroyed everything." Sundar followed him through a dim corridor lit only by streaks of sunlight breaking through broken shutters. When the caretaker unlocked the metal door, a wave of stale air rushed out. Inside, shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten files and reels of data tapes. Sundar carefully moved through the dust, brushing his fingers over labels written in fading ink. Project Arya, Communication Framework Beta, Protocol 1979. Then he saw it, a small brown folder with the name L. Pichai typed neatly on the corner. His pulse quickened as he opened it. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, technical sketches, and something unexpected. A small photograph of his mother with 3 other scientists, all smiling beside a bulky terminal machine. But at the bottom of the page, the signatures told another story. Her name had been crossed out in black ink, replaced by someone else's initials. Sundar stared at it for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered, "They erased her twice, once from history and once from the record." He gathered everything carefully, wrapping the fragile pages in a clean folder. But as he turned to leave, the caretaker stopped him. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "there's something else. A few years ago, a journalist came here asking about her too. He said there were rumors that her research had been used by a private company later on. He left a business card, said he'd found something big, but he disappeared before publishing it." Sundar's eyes widened. "Do you still have that card?" The caretaker nodded and handed him a worn piece of paper from his pocket. It bore the name Rajesh Deshmukh, investigative correspondent. Below it was a faded phone number and the word, "Truth always finds a way." Sundar held the card tightly. A storm of thoughts swirled in his mind. If someone had already uncovered traces of his mother's missing credit, it meant the truth was out there. Maybe even proof that her work was stolen or sold. As he stepped back into the sunlight, the weight of the discovery pressed on him. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Amma, I'll finish what you started." That evening, from his hotel room, he called the number on the card. The line was dead. He tried again. Nothing. So he searched online. Rajesh Deshmukh's name appeared in old articles from 10 years ago, but then abruptly stopped. One headline caught his attention. "Journalist missing after controversial tech investigation." The air around him seemed to tighten. The pieces were falling into place, but they were darker than he expected. His mother's erased contribution, a missing journalist, and now an entire thread of history connecting them. He sat down, looking at the folder of her notes spread before him. The rain outside had turned into a storm. Thunder rolled across the sky as if echoing his silent vow. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't just about recognition anymore. It was about uncovering the truth that someone had worked very hard to bury. And whoever that was, they weren't going to make it easy for him. The shadows of innovation, the storm from the night before, had left the streets glistening, water shimmering on the asphalt like broken glass. Sundar stood by the window of his hotel room, staring out at the early morning chaos of Chennai, the rickshaws honking, the vendors shouting, the scent of wet jasmine and coffee drifting through the open air. Yet his mind wasn't in the present. It was still lost in the past, buried in that dusty archive surrounded by faded ink, crossed-out names, and the ghost of a mother who had lived in silence. He hadn't slept all night. The image of the photograph in the file haunted him, his mother smiling beside those men, her name erased as though she never existed. Sundar couldn't understand how people could be so deliberate in burying the truth. She had spent her entire life teaching him that integrity mattered more than recognition, but now he felt a deeper duty, to restore her rightful place in history. He looked at the journalist's card again. Rajesh Deshmukh, a man who had once tried to uncover the same truth, and now he was missing. Sundar had faced global scrutiny as the CEO of Google. Congress hearings, privacy debates, controversies. But this was different. This wasn't about algorithms or data. This was about his blood, his history, and perhaps something even larger than himself. He dialed the number of an old contact in Mumbai, an investigative analyst named Aruna, who had once collaborated with Google on cybersecurity awareness programs. She was sharp, resourceful, and fearless when it came to tracing the digital trails people thought they had erased. When she answered, her tone carried surprise and curiosity. Sundar, this is unexpected. What's going on? He spoke softly but with urgency. Aruna, I need help finding a journalist named Rajesh Deshmukh. He disappeared around a decade ago while investigating something related to early Indian tech projects. I think it's connected to my mother's past. There was a short silence on the other end. That name rings a bell, she said slowly. He used to write for a small digital paper called The Truth Ledger. But the site shut down mysteriously. Some of his archives were scrubbed. I can try digging through old web caches and private backups. Please, Sundar replied. Whatever you find could be important. After hanging up, he packed the old file, his mother's letter, and the photograph into his briefcase. He had a flight to Mumbai that afternoon to meet Aruna in person. He knew the answers wouldn't come easy, but he also knew the cost of silence. His mother had paid it once. He would not let it happen again. When the plane landed, the sun was already setting over the Arabian Sea. Mumbai's skyline glowed like molten gold, and yet there was something heavy about the evening air, as if it carried the weight of unfinished stories. Aruna met him at a quiet rooftop cafe near Bandra. She wore simple clothes and glasses that gave her a scholar's seriousness. Her laptop was open, filled with notes and documents she had retrieved. You were right, she began as he sat down. Rajesh was working on a story about a government research project that vanished from public record. He believed the core technology was sold to a private conglomerate during the early digital revolution, and your mother's name shows up in some of his drafts, though not directly. She's referred to as the unnamed engineer. Sundar's hands tightened around his cup. So it was stolen, he murmured. More than that, Aruna continued. From what I've pieced together, the technology your mother helped develop, those early communication codes, became the basis for one of the first digital transmission patents filed in the 1990s. The patent was registered under a corporate entity based in Singapore, but the original data came from India's Defense Research Archives. Someone copied the code and commercialized it. Do we know who? Not yet, she said. The company doesn't exist anymore. It was dissolved. But it was funded by an international investor, who later became a key partner in early internet infrastructure deals. And guess what? One of his subsidiaries collaborated with Google years later. Sundar froze, his mind reeling. Are you saying that part of my mother's work could have influenced the very systems my company built upon? Aruna nodded slowly. Indirectly, yes. The foundational logic, how communication channels transmit and verify data integrity, it traces back to the same framework she helped create. It's like her fingerprints are hidden inside the world's digital DNA, but no one knows. He stared into the distance, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. She never told me, he whispered. She never told anyone. She just kept living like it didn't matter. Aruna closed her laptop gently. Sometimes the greatest minds stay silent not because they're weak, but because they believe time will reveal the truth when the world is ready. Sundar leaned back, lost in thought. He could feel a deep sense of irony weaving through his soul. The son of a woman who built the foundation for communication. Technology had grown up to lead one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, without ever realizing his mother's invisible contribution, but his reflection was cut short when Aruna's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and frowned. That's strange, she muttered. Someone just tried to access my system remotely. It's coming from an encrypted network. Sundar looked at her sharply. You mean we're being tracked? She nodded slowly. It's possible. This kind of tracing only happens when you touch something someone doesn't want uncovered. The realization struck him like thunder. The story wasn't just about a forgotten woman anymore. It was about people who had benefited from her silence and wanted to keep it that way. We need to be careful, Aruna said firmly. If this involves international patents and government data, then whoever erased her name might still have power. That night, Sundar couldn't sleep again. He sat by the hotel balcony, the waves crashing against the rocks below, the wind carrying the scent of salt and secrets. He replayed everything in his head, the letter, the old file, Venkataraman's story, and now this new revelation. His mother hadn't just been a forgotten contributor. She had been the key to something global, something too valuable for her to be credited for. He took out her letter again and read the final lines slowly. You will find my silence in the echoes of your voice, Sundar. When you speak truth, you will finish the work I began. Tears welled in his eyes. She had known. Somehow she had known that one day he would find her trail, but he also knew that truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be proven. The next morning, he met Aruna again at her office. She had stayed up all night analyzing data trails. I found something, she said, her eyes gleaming with both exhaustion and triumph. There's an archived server from the Singapore company that's still online, protected under a legacy domain. But it's hidden behind old government encryption. I can't access it without authorization. Sundar thought for a moment, then said quietly, I can. Aruna looked at him, surprised. He smiled faintly. Google still has partnership privileges in that region. If I request archival access under research restoration, no one will question it. Within hours, he had the necessary credentials. Together, they opened the digital vault. What they found inside made the room go silent. Hundreds of files appeared, project notes, transmission logs, test reports, and among them was a scanned image labeled Document 47LP. When Sundar clicked it open, his heart stopped. It was the original report of the communication system his mother's team had developed, and there at the bottom in faint typewriter font was her full name, Lakshmi Pichai, before it was crossed out in the later version. The truth was undeniable now. They had proof, but before they could celebrate, Aruna noticed something else. At the end of the report was a signature and a date. Someone had authorized the deletion of her name. It was signed by a powerful industrialist who had later become a major figure in India's digital expansion program, a man now close to the country's leadership. Aruna whispered, This is bigger than we thought. Sundar's expression darkened. Then we don't stop here. He closed the laptop slowly, his face calm but his heart burning with purpose. The world saw him as a man of technology, but now he understood his real calling, to restore the truth that time and power had erased. That evening, as he stood on the balcony again, the phone rang. An unknown number. When he answered, a voice said quietly, Mr. Pichai, stop looking into the past. Some truths are best left buried. Then the line went dead. For a moment, Sundar stood frozen, staring into the city lights. Fear and anger battled inside him, but something deeper emerged, a sense of destiny. His mother had faced silence with grace. He would face it with courage. He turned back toward the table where the letter lay open and whispered, Amma, they erased your name. Now I will make the world remember it. The voice that could not be silenced. The following days unfolded like a quiet storm. Sundar moved through them with a calm face, but inside a war was raging. He had seen the proof with his own eyes. His mother's name, once proudly typed at the bottom of that report, crossed out by a powerful hand. It wasn't just injustice anymore. It was theft written into the pages of history. And now, as he looked out over Mumbai's restless skyline, he knew what he had to do. Truth, he thought, wasn't a whisper. It was a responsibility. The world saw Sundar Pichai as a symbol of calm leadership, the man who smiled softly through the storms of public scrutiny, who believed in quiet progress. But this time his calm was a mask, hiding the fire that had been rekindled inside him. He spent hours with Aruna, mapping every connection, every document, every signature that could prove his mother's rightful contribution. Together, they built a digital map of names and timelines, tracing the journey of her work from the government lab to the international corporations that profited from it. One evening, as rain lashed the windows of Aruna's office, Sundar leaned forward, studying a highlighted connection on the board. "This signature," he said quietly, pointing to the name of the industrialist who had authorized the erasure. "He's still alive." Aruna nodded. "And still powerful. He's now a board member of the National Innovation Council. Confronting him won't be simple." Sundar's gaze hardened. "Then I won't confront him. I'll make him confront the truth." She looked at him puzzled. "What do you mean?" "The Global Innovation Summit is in 2 weeks," he said. "I've been invited to speak about the evolution of digital communication. I'll use that stage. I'll show them the real story, not just of innovation, but of the woman who made it possible." Aruna's eyes widened. "That's risky. You'll be going against some of the most influential figures in technology and politics. They could try to discredit you." Sundar nodded slowly. "They can try, but they can't erase her twice." For the next few days, he worked in silence, preparing his presentation. Each slide carried more than data. It carried fragments of a truth buried for decades. He included old photos, code sequences from the recovered files, and the original project reports. At the bottom of one slide, he added a single line, "Dedicated to the woman whose silence built the sound of our world." As the day of the summit approached, the tension grew. He began receiving anonymous emails, subtle warnings disguised as polite advice. One read, "History cannot be rewritten without consequence." Another said, "Some stories end better when untold." Sundar ignored them all. He had made a promise to his mother's memory, and he would not break it. On the morning of the summit, the air in New Delhi was crisp and cool. The grand hall was filled with delegates, scientists, and ministers from across the world. The Indian flag fluttered beside digital screens that displayed the event's theme, the future of human connection. When Sundar entered the room, a soft murmur spread through the crowd. Cameras followed him as he took his seat near the front row. As the sessions progressed, speeches filled the air with familiar phrases: innovation, growth, sustainability. But Sundar's mind was elsewhere. His fingers rested on the folded letter in his pocket, the same one he had found in his mother's box. Her words were his armor. When the moderator finally announced, "And now, we invite Mr. Sundar Pichai to share his vision," the hall erupted in applause. He walked up to the stage with measured steps. The lights dimmed and the large screen behind him flickered to life. He began softly, almost conversationally. "We often talk about the future of technology," he said. "But today I want to talk about its past, about the people who built it and those history forgot." His words flowed gently at first, but the emotion beneath them grew stronger. He spoke of the early experiments in communication systems, of the unnamed engineers who worked without glory. Then, with quiet conviction, he revealed the story of his mother. The audience leaned in. There was no movement, no whisper, only the sound of his voice carrying through the hall like truth long overdue. He projected the image of the original report on the screen, the one with her name, and then the one where it had been crossed out. "This," he said, pointing at the faint letters, "is my mother's name, Lakshmi Pichai. She worked tirelessly on this project. She was told that her name would not appear because it might complicate funding. She accepted it. She moved on. She raised her children, including me. But tonight I cannot accept it. I cannot move on. Because if we build our future on erased names, then our progress is incomplete." The hall fell into stunned silence. Sundar paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he added, "We talk about data integrity and systems. But what about moral integrity in our history?" Somewhere in the front row, the industrialist, the man who had once signed off her erasure, shifted uncomfortably. The camera caught his expression, his eyes darting downward. Sundar saw it but didn't stop. He continued with calm authority. Innovation isn't just made in labs. It's made in hearts that refuse to give up, in people who work without recognition, and sometimes those people are our mothers. When he finished, the hall remained silent for several seconds, the kind of silence that carried respect rather than hesitation. Then slowly one person stood and began to clap. Another followed. And then another. Within moments, the entire room was on its feet. The applause was thunderous yet reverent. Prime Minister Modi, seated near the stage, rose to his feet again, just as he had at the previous event. This time, though, there was something different in his expression, a mixture of pride and sorrow. When the applause finally softened, he walked to the stage, shook Sundar's hand, and said softly, "Today, India remembers her." Sundar's voice trembled slightly as he replied, "Thank you, sir. I only gave back what she already gave to all of us." News of the speech spread across the world within hours. Headlines flooded every digital platform. Sundar Pichai reveals untold story of India's forgotten tech pioneer. Interviews were requested. Tributes poured in. And old colleagues of Lakshmi Pichai began coming forward with their own memories. But amid the praise, darker ripples moved beneath the surface. Late that evening, as Sundar sat alone in his hotel room, Aruna called. Her tone was urgent. "Someone tried to access the recovered files again," she said. "Not a hacker, a private intelligence firm. They want to know what else we have." "What else we have?" Sundar repeated. "Yes, I think your mother might have left more than just research notes. Some of the recovered documents mention a prototype, a device she was developing independently. It wasn't part of the government project. If it exists, it could prove she was ahead of her time. A prototype." Sundar leaned forward. "Where would it be?" Aruna hesitated. "There's a hint in one of the letters. Something about the place where voices never fade. Does that mean anything to you?" He thought for a long moment, then suddenly his eyes widened. "Yes," he said softly. "It means Madurai, our old home. She used to say that the temple bells there carried voices to heaven. That's where she must have hidden it." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Aruna said, "Then we go there next." Sundar looked out the window at the city glowing beneath him and felt the wind shift. His mother's story had already changed the world once, but now, a new chapter was calling from the past. One that might reveal not just who she was, but what she left behind. And as thunder rolled across the sky, Sundar whispered to the night, "Amma, your voice isn't gone. It's just waiting to be heard again." The secret beneath the bells. The train to Madurai moved slowly through the misty countryside, the rhythmic sound of its wheels echoing like a heartbeat through the quiet dawn. Sundar sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the passing fields of green and gold. He hadn't returned to his hometown in years. Every sight, the banana trees, the temple towers rising from the horizon, the scent of jasmine drifting through the windows, felt like a doorway into memory. Beside him sat Aruna, her laptop closed, her gaze equally distant. The past few days had been intense. Sleepless nights, constant messages, and the weight of a truth that refused to stay buried. Sundar held his mother's old letter once again, reading the line that had brought them here. The place where voices never fade. He whispered those words under his breath as though she were still guiding him. When they arrived, the air was thick with the warmth of the south. They took a small car to the old neighborhood where Sundar had grown up, a narrow lane lined with bougainvillea and stone houses. The home stood just as he remembered, its faded blue doors creaking open with a sound that felt both haunting and familiar. Inside, the air smelled of dust and sandalwood. The furniture was still covered with old white sheets and sunlight streamed through the cracks in the shutters. Sundar walked through each room slowly, his footsteps echoing softly. He could almost hear his mother's voice calling from the kitchen, her laughter blending with the sounds of temple bells in the distance. In her study, everything was exactly as he had left it years ago. Her desk, her books, the typewriter she had once used. He placed his hand gently on the wooden surface. It was smooth but cold, as though waiting for him to remember. Aruna looked around carefully. "She must have hidden the prototype here somewhere," she said quietly. "But where?" Sundar smiled faintly. "If I know her, it won't be in an obvious place." She believed the most valuable things should rest where people least expect. They began searching. Hours passed as they checked drawers, cupboards, even the attic. But they found nothing. Sundar grew restless, walking out into the small courtyard. There at the far end stood the old temple bell his mother had once loved. She had told him as a child that its sound carried blessings across the world. He walked closer and ran his fingers along the bronze surface. Then something caught his eye. A faint symbol etched near the base, one he had never noticed before. It was a series of geometric lines, almost like a circuit diagram. "Aruna," he called softly. "Come look at this." She crouched beside him, her eyes narrowing. "That's not random. It looks like a map or pattern." Together they traced it, and Sundar suddenly realized what it was pointing to: the small stone base beneath the bell. With Aruna's help, he lifted the bell slightly, revealing a loose tile underneath. Beneath the tile was a small metallic box wrapped in cloth. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a compact device, rusted slightly with age but clearly sophisticated for its time. It had wires, a small antenna, and what looked like an early version of a circuit board. Along with it was a small handwritten note in his mother's neat handwriting: "To the dreamers who believe in connection. Someday this will help people speak without barriers." Aruna stared at it in awe. "This is decades ahead of its time," she whispered. "Your mother built a prototype for wireless communication. She predicted global connectivity before it existed." Sundar held the device as if it were something sacred. "She called it the bridge," he said softly. "I remember her saying that once. One day, Sundar, the bridge will let everyone speak and be heard." I thought it was just a bedtime story. Tears welled in his eyes as the full truth sank in. His mother hadn't just been part of a government project. She had gone beyond it, creating something revolutionary, something the world had only begun to understand decades later. But before he could process the weight of it, Aruna's phone buzzed sharply. She glanced at the screen and her face paled. "We've been tracked again," she said quickly. "They know we're here." Sundar looked at her, startled. "How?" "Someone's monitoring my network access. The moment I scanned the prototype for data, it triggered a ping. They're tracing us." A car engine roared outside. Sundar's heart pounded as he looked through the window. A black vehicle had stopped at the end of the street. Two men stepped out, dressed in plain clothes but moving with precision. "We need to go," Aruna said, packing up her laptop. "No," Sundar replied firmly, holding the prototype close. "This is my mother's work. I'm not leaving it behind again." They slipped out through the back door, moving quietly through the narrow alleys that wound behind the house. The sound of footsteps followed, a rhythm too deliberate to mistake for coincidence. They hid behind an old stone wall, catching their breath. "They won't stop," Aruna whispered. "Whoever they are, they're protecting something big. Maybe this prototype holds more than we realize." Sundar looked at the device in his hands. It was small, fragile, but it carried an energy he could almost feel. "It holds her voice," he said softly. "Her dream. That's what they fear." They managed to escape through a crowded marketplace, blending with the noise and color until the black car faded into the distance. Later, inside a small guest house near the river, Sundar finally sat down and examined the device carefully. Aruna connected it to a portable power source. To their astonishment, the small screen on its surface flickered faintly, displaying a line of text. "If you found this, you have already built the bridge." They exchanged stunned glances. The message continued to scroll automatically, as if it had been waiting for decades to speak again. "The system works on frequency harmony. Human voices can travel beyond language when aligned in shared tone. Connection is not technology, it's empathy." Sundar couldn't speak. The words felt like poetry, like prophecy. His mother had built not just a machine, but a philosophy of communication itself. Aruna whispered, "This could redefine how we think about networks, about connection." But Sundar was no longer thinking about technology. He was thinking about her. About a woman who believed that the true bridge between people wasn't made of circuits or signals, but of understanding. He looked out the window, watching the river shimmer in the moonlight. "She was trying to tell us that technology should serve humanity, not control it," he said quietly. "And now it's my turn to finish her work." Just then Aruna's phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown number. It read, "You found it. You have one choice left. Bring it to Delhi tomorrow, alone." Aruna looked at him nervously. "What do we do?" Sundar took a long breath, his expression calm yet determined. "We go to Delhi," he said softly. "Not to give it to them, but to show the world what she created." The temple bells rang in the distance, their sound drifting through the night like an echo from the past. And as the notes faded into the silence, Sundar felt a quiet strength rise within him, the same strength that once lived in his mother. The bridge awakened. The morning sun rose over Delhi like a promise wrapped in gold. The city moved with its usual rhythm, the sound of horns, vendors calling, and life pushing forward through the weight of history. But for Sundar Pichai, this morning felt unlike any other. It wasn't a day of routine meetings or global conferences. It was the day he would walk into the heart of truth, carrying his mother's dream in his hands. He stood before the mirror in his hotel room, adjusting his simple gray jacket. There was no corporate polish today, no prepared speech, no team of advisors waiting in the wings. Just him, the small prototype in a worn cloth pouch, and a mission that transcended technology. Aruna stood nearby, eyes weary but determined. She had barely slept, yet her focus remained sharp. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked quietly. "They might try to stop you in front of everyone." Sundar nodded slowly. "That's exactly why I have to do it in front of everyone." The invitation he had received the night before had been precise. A private demonstration requested by members of the National Innovation Council. It was being held at the Heritage Science Institute, a government complex that symbolized India's technological progress. But Sundar knew this wasn't just a demonstration. It was a trap disguised as protocol. The drive there was silent. Outside, the streets were alive with color and movement. But Sundar's mind was still anchored in Madurai, in the quiet sound of temple bells and his mother's smile. Every step he took now felt guided by her unseen hand. When they arrived, the building loomed tall, its glass walls reflecting the early light. Inside, the council members were already seated in a circular room filled with screens and microphones. At the center stood a long table, and on it a space clearly meant for the prototype. Among the officials sat the same industrialist whose signature had once erased Lakshmi Pichai's name. His face was calm, unreadable as he adjusted his tie. "Mr. Pichai," the moderator greeted him warmly, though his eyes carried calculation. "We are honored to have you here. We understand you've discovered something extraordinary, something connected to India's technological roots." Sundar placed the small device on the table. "Extraordinary, yes," he said softly, "but not because of its power, because of its purpose." The industrialist leaned forward. "And you believe this prototype was built by your mother?" Sundar met his gaze without flinching. "I don't believe." "I know." A faint murmur spread through the room. Aruna stood quietly by the wall, her laptop ready. The moderator gestured politely. "We'd like to see how it works." Sundar nodded. He connected the device to a small portable power source. At first nothing happened, just silence and a soft hum. Then the small screen flickered, lines of text forming slowly. "Connection initiated. Awaiting voice." He took a deep breath and spoke softly. "Lakshmi Pichai." The device glowed faintly, as if awakening. Then, to everyone's astonishment, a soft, clear female voice echoed through the speakers. Not synthetic, not mechanical, but warm and human. It was his mother's voice. "If you are hearing this," the voice said gently, "then you have already understood what I could not say aloud. Connection is not built with machines. It begins with truth. And truth cannot be owned." The room went still. Sundar's throat tightened as the voice continued. "To those who used silence to build their empires, remember this. Silence does not erase sound. It only delays the echo." The industrialist's expression cracked for the first time. He shifted in his seat, his confidence unraveling. Reporters began whispering to each other, sensing the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Sundar stepped forward. "My mother left this message not to accuse, but to remind. Her invention was not meant for profit or power. It was meant to bridge people, to let every voice, no matter how small, be heard." He looked around the room, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "We have spent decades building walls in the name of innovation. She built a bridge, and today, that bridge speaks again." Aruna activated her laptop, connecting the prototype to a live broadcast feed. Within minutes, millions of viewers across the world were watching. The council's private demonstration had become a global revelation. The device continued to emit the soft hum of connection, as if alive, as if responding to the world's collective attention. Then something extraordinary happened. Microphones from across the room picked up voices, whispers, fragments of speech, all being harmonized and translated instantly by the device. People speaking in different languages could now hear one another in perfect understanding. Gasps filled the room. "It's interpreting emotion, not just language," Aruna said, astonished. "It's reading tone, context, even intention." Tears filled Sundar's eyes. "She created empathy through technology," he whispered, before anyone even believed it was possible. As the realization spread, the cameras captured every face, wonder, disbelief, and shame among those who had once dismissed her. The industrialist stood slowly, his face pale. This must be regulated. "It's too powerful to—" Sundar interrupted him calmly. "It's too human to be controlled." The crowd broke into applause. Some clapped in admiration, others in guilt. The voice of Lakshmi Pichai spoke once more through the device. "If you are listening, build wisely. Build with kindness. And remember, connection without compassion is only noise." That sentence silenced everyone. The broadcast continued across the world, trending on every platform, spreading like wildfire. People began calling her the mother of empathy technology. In one moment, decades of silence had been replaced with recognition, love, and truth. When the event ended, Sundar quietly disconnected the device. Aruna stood beside him, smiling through tears. "She would be proud," she said softly. He nodded, looking at the small machine in his hands. "She already knew this moment would come," he whispered. "She didn't build this for me. She built it for humanity." That evening, as the sun set over Delhi, he walked alone to the banks of the Yamuna River. The city lights shimmered across the water. He took out his mother's letter one last time and read the final words he had once overlooked. "When you find the bridge, don't protect it. Share it." He smiled faintly, understanding at last. The prototype wasn't meant to be locked away in a lab or museum. It was meant to be free. The next morning, he released the design and all its data publicly, ensuring no one could ever own it again. The world reacted with awe. Researchers, engineers, and dreamers began building on Lakshmi Pichai's blueprint, expanding her idea into open networks that prioritized human connection over profit. And wherever people spoke of her name, they spoke with reverence. Not as a forgotten figure, but as a visionary who saw technology as a reflection of the heart. Weeks later, Sundar returned to Madurai. The house was quiet, filled with peace. He placed the now inactive prototype back beneath the old temple bell. The air was still except for the faint chime as the wind brushed against the metal. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Amma, your bridge is alive now, and it will never be silenced again." The bell rang once more, clear and bright, echoing across the courtyard, a sound that seemed to carry across time itself, across every barrier she had once dreamed of breaking. And as the sound faded into the distance, Sundar smiled through tears, knowing the world had finally heard her voice.